Episode 26 of this week's Navigating Now virtual roundtable series brought to you by Thoughtium. We are here every week, Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Today, 2:30, a bit of a new time. But we are here every week with leadership topics that matter most to you all, our community. We're extremely excited about today's topic, and we're going to dive right in because there's a lot to cover. But before we do, a couple of housekeeping items. We want to welcome everybody who's joined us via Zoom, those who have registered for this discussion today. Have the opportunity to ask questions of our guest throughout. You can do that through the chat box or the Q&A in Zoom. We also want to welcome everybody from our YouTube community and LinkedIn. We got a lot of folks that are stopping by this content in their LinkedIn feed. So we appreciate you stopping by and listening in today. We also stream live on Facebook. So for those folks who are joining live via social media or our website, feel free to say hello in the comments box. I'll make sure that I keep an eye on those. If you've got any questions for our guests, you can post them in comments as well too. So we are 26 weeks in to our Navigating Now series, and we continue to bring diversity to the table. Diversity of thought, diversity of experience, and diversity of perspective. And we, the Thoughtium team, have been so fortunate to get to know today's guest over the last week or two at a time where it really matters most for us to think about how we exist as corporate citizens and how we bring our own selves to the work that we do every day. Today's guest, Jaci McCarty, is the owner of the McCarty Method. She has an incredible story of her own path to leadership and wellness. And she now spends her time really bringing these concepts to folks both in and out of the corporate world. Today, we're going to be talking about corporate wellness. And we're going to be unpacking this ever familiar but very relevant term today for all of us, the term wellness. It's really at the forefront, I think, of a lot of our own personal thinking, as well as ensuring that folks on our team and folks in our family and our community are taken care of. So a lot to unpack today. Jaci, thank you so much for joining and welcome to the table.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So I thought, before we get into the content today, you being a practitioner of wellness, I know that you've got something for us that allows us to focus in, maybe take a deep breath. And so I thought I would maybe offer the opportunity for you to guide the first few minutes of today's discussion.
I would be so happy to do that. So welcome, everybody. What I'm going to have us do just to start is what I call kind of arriving now or re-arriving as it will into this setting, into now. And so I'm going to invite you wherever you're sitting to perhaps close your eyes. You could leave your eyes open, doesn't really matter, but it kind of helps. And as you close your eyes, or you're maybe just looking downward a little bit more, let's just begin by finding a deeper breath. So it doesn't matter how you breathe, but just breathe in as deeply as you possibly can. And when you get to the very top of that breath, hold on to it for a moment. Really feel how it affects your body, where you feel it in your body. And then right when it becomes uncomfortable, let it go. Follow it all the way to the bottom. So really breathe all the way out. What does that feel like? And then relax for a moment. And start to just experience where you're sitting. Start by feeling the chair you're in, the floor, wherever you're sitting. Feel the contact points between your seat and the seat of the chair. Perhaps your spine leaning into the back of the chair. Or your feet pressing gently into the floor, just experiencing your body, the room. Just kind of saying to yourself, I'm here now. and mentally, physically letting go of everything else. And we're going to come back to our breathing for just a moment, adding a silent counting to our breath. So as you're ready, I'm going to invite us all to count in separately and together for the count of 4. Nice and slow, 4 in, and then 4 out. Now, if this feels too difficult, you can take it down to 3, or if you want to take it up to 5. The point is to slow down, to count, and to find an equal inhale and exhale. Let's do this 1 or 2 more times. And as you finish this next counted exhalation, just relax. Let your breath come back to its natural pace and rhythm. And just before you come back into the discussion, just know why you're here. Think about why you're here today. What attracted you to this conversation? We call that intention. And as you're ready, you can blink your eyes open if they were closed and just refocus again. So here we are, right back in present moment. Oh, I cannot hear you. There we go.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There we go. Oh, no problem.
I was saying, I can tell you why I'm here. And it's for this. We so seldom take the opportunity to acknowledge why we're here. And oftentimes, you need to prep yourself to do that. And we're going to get into some ways, some best practices that allow you the tools and the opportunity to take a pause in a world where we're going from one Zoom meeting to the next. But first, Jaci, I want to thank you for guiding the first few moments of this. I think it's really important. I was telling you as we were prepping for this just about 20 minutes ago, the person that needs this moment the most today is myself. Having kind of gone from meeting to meeting, knowing that we were going to have this discussion, even just starting the discussion for the first 2 or 3 minutes in a way that allows you to acknowledge where you're at physically, your breath, the discussion you're about to have, and even just acknowledge each other in this space is really effective. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah. So we also talked about just how timely this topic is. I think today, more than ever, we're really focused on this concept of how do we keep ourselves and our teams well. This is not just a concept now. Wellness is not just a concept for leaders. It's a real opportunity that we're solving for. And it's a challenge as well, too. Now, being in a virtual environment, it brings on new levels of complexity in terms of how do we not just promote wellness amongst our folks, but how do we facilitate it? How do we create the space for that? How do we bring people into their own wellness? How do we invite people into this? So we're going to talk about all those things today. Before we do, I want to hear a little bit more about you, Jaci, because as we got to know you, I understand you've got quite a cool story yourself, just in terms of your career path and what has brought you to today. Now focusing your career and your practitionership, your livelihood on instilling and educating folks on wellness.
Well, I was in the corporate world a long time ago. So I had a pretty big break between now and then, but I was working for a couple big companies earlier in my career and in sales, and very stressful, right? Very stressful. And what I've learned about myself is that I did not have good strategies to manage stress. And so you just do what everybody else does. You just keep going, right? You just keep going. You make your numbers. Deal with all the things that we have to deal with when we work in a big company. And when I left the corporate world to raise my kids, and I did that for a long time, which was great, I realized that life really could not be for me anymore, or I didn't want that life for me anymore. And that was because I didn't feel there was that support in a corporate environment, that wasn't something that was even really discussed. Now, again, this was a long time ago. Flash to now, right? When it was time for me to get back into working again, I had become a yoga teacher and gone through that training. And that came to me from a physical injury, actually. And when I got into a yoga practice, what I started to realize was the yoga was helping me manage my stress in a way that I had never known before. Right? It was helping me to really know myself, know my patterns, know how I express stress, what was happening in my body, and then also how I felt so calm afterward. And it was like, oh my gosh, we're on to something here.
Yeah.
And and so I went through that and was teaching that for a long time. And then I went through another pretty tough experience, a divorce after a long marriage. And the yoga practice wasn't doing it. The stress level was more internal, more mental, and I needed something else. And people kept saying meditation, mindfulness. And I thought, I can't sit still. There's no way. I have a monkey mind. This is what everybody says, by the way. And I didn't think that it would be for me. And I happened to read a book. I just picked up a book randomly. I can't even remember how I came to it. And it resonated with me. I begun to practice it. And I actually contacted the woman who wrote the book. And she had just started a training academy for meditation and mindfulness teachers. And this was 8 or 9 years ago. And so I went through that training. And the first thing I thought was, I want to bring this back into companies, because it's the reason I didn't want to go back was because of the atmosphere of really, I felt not acknowledging the humanness in us. Yeah. And so really that's how I came back one way or the other into the corporate world, but now as a teacher of wellness, of mindfulness and meditation.
And how long ago was this that you started to bring these modalities into the corporate space?
Probably about 7 years ago.
Okay, great. I want to talk a little bit about maybe the difference then versus today, because I know that the marketplace has changed for this type of work. And I know that we've been able to loosen a little bit of the restraint that we have sometimes in our jobs and allow some of this to seep into our professional lives. I want to touch on that in a moment, but I also want to maybe share, an experience that we had yesterday, very similar, and it had a very similar effect as to the way that we opened this session today, where we had an opportunity to really just pause and acknowledge exactly where we were. We host a get-together of other entrepreneurs every 2 weeks here in Chicago. And recently it's been tough because we've had to do really small groups and keep it, socially distanced. And this week particular, obviously, it has been a fairly intense week, you could say, for most folks.
Yes.
But we decided to get together with a few of our community. And when we got together, I could just sense that there was, everybody was dealing with the week in their own way. And I could sense that there was maybe just a heightened level of tension, heightened level of awareness of kind of how we were all coming to the discussion. And there was something inside of me that, aside from kind of opening the discussion the way we typically would, which would be kind of diving right into introductions and the topic at hand, I just paused and I said, I want to go around the room and I want to ask everybody, how are you? And it's interesting because that question was so uncomfortable for me even to ask, because I was bringing that question into a format and an environment that's not used to it. It's the same question that I ask my twin sister when I talk to her most nights, or, you know, my mother when I call her on the weekend. And we so easily say, how are you? But I was struck at how uncomfortable it was for me to ask my colleagues and my peers when maybe they weren't necessarily expecting it. And what followed was this collective exhale. You could tell that there were folks that really needed that question to be asked. And they felt comfortable with the small group that we were in sharing how they were. And everybody kind of brought their own perspective and even their own emotions to that question. We were talking afterwards about, you know, what made that moment so powerful for all of us to really open up and share the way that we did. You know, of course, it's vulnerability, it's psychological safety, it's creating the space for those types of discussions. But what we landed on too was that there was a sense of acknowledgement of each other at a time where I think we all individually and collectively needed it. And I was reminded at how important it is sometimes to just acknowledge who you're with. And, you know, everybody wants to be seen, everybody wants to be heard. And sometimes we just need to be acknowledged. So I want to put that out there because it's very similar to maybe some of the work that you do at the front end of these meetings in acknowledging where we're at physically and also even just acknowledging each other. Well,
first of all, I want to say it's people like you doing what you did in that setting that's going to change things. So that takes courage. It really does. And that is really one of the highest traits of a leader, courage, right? And vulnerability. But what you did was give permission to be human, and you related on the human level. And so often the corporate space, there is like a stigma around relating on a human level, right? It's like, right? I do feel like this, the pandemic and what's going on in the world right now it's a global experience and it's a human experience. There's not one person that can't relate to this, not one. It's around, I don't know if that's ever happened before. It's everyone. And so I think it's such a great opportunity now, and everyone's ripe for it, right? It's like, before I can do anything else, I have to acknowledge where I am. Who am I right now? Because if I don't, then when I go into a meeting, my mind isn't in the meeting anyway. Right? I'm stuck in the emotion, in the thought process. You know, we time travel internally, even if our body is in a meeting room, right? So I don't know if that even answered your question, but I think we were saying exactly the same thing, which is recognizing the humanness, the sameness, you could call it, as opposed to the role we play within the company. Now, certainly we're not going to get rid of the roles we play. There's no need for that. But could we think about it differently, right? Could we think about human first, role second? Right? And I think that's really where I see, since pandemic, because I teach weekly in some big companies and I talk to people and they tell me that these meditation sessions and the stuff that we're doing helps. Right. And I remind them, this is coming from your company. They're acknowledging that you need this. Right. So yes, I think it's good. It's almost like if there ever was a time to try vulnerability, if there ever was a time to try acknowledgement in ways that you haven't as a leader, it is right now. You know, we've joked as a team that as much as, you know, when April hit and we were all forced to stay in our homes, stay out of the conference rooms, stay away from the water cooler. Our initial reaction to that was, okay, I'm closed off to the world. And then we very quickly realized that
Uh, I am now, I am now in my home with a camera on at pretty much all times. And I'm
Yeah.
also managing my family next to me. And I'm, managing the one-on-one discussion, which now exclusively happens with video. There's no such thing as the conference call anymore, where you can kind of just hide audio only. And we've acknowledged as a team, there have been moments where it gets very real. I mean, from like the cat that jumps up in front of the screen to, your kid that comes in and really just needs something and can't wait till the end of your 2:30 meeting. And I think what we realized is that the world to our lives, or the door to our lives, has been opened in a completely new way. And it's forced a little bit of this vulnerability. And it's created this, what I believe is this unbelievable opportunity to try vulnerability, to try acknowledgement, because we're doing it at scale on a day-to-day basis. We're having to show up in the middle of intense amounts of pressure with the camera on at all time. And I have made more mistakes in front of my team over the last 8 months, like visually in front of my team, than I had in the last 8 years, where I could plan to show up to this meeting in a certain way.
And it's working. Let me tell you, it's working. I see it. And everywhere that I'm teaching now, when I'm zooming in, and it's my favorite thing. I love it. I do.
Tell us a story or two of like that.
Oh my gosh. Like
that moment where you just realize.
The CEO of a huge company, right? Putting lip gloss on while she's talking, right?
Yep.
I've heard, I mean, I can't even think, but there's been so many where we all just laugh. That's the thing. And it just takes it to a human level. And I just love it. One of my favorite things has been seeing my students, who I would normally see at their company, right, in their work role, although coming in for a meditation class or a mindfulness class, at home in their regular clothes with their kids in the background. I've even had them bring their kids or their wives or their animals to session. And I've loved every second of it. Love it.
I've learned more about my team's personal, interests and hobbies and what's most important to them over the last 8 months. And we came from a world where we physically showed up for each other every day in an office. And now we're not. And we're like actually really learning about each other.
Yeah. And don't you kind of hope it doesn't change?
Well, that's another aspect of this whole psychology that I'm so fascinated with.
Yeah, because I've heard many people say they hope it doesn't, but let's see if we can really bring it. We'll see.
I asked this as an icebreaker question at a workshop the other day, and people just had so much fun with it. And we asked, if tomorrow, if today you woke up and you had the context that we did over the last 8 months, we've endured 8 months of no travel, stay at home, Zoom meetings, et cetera, connecting virtually, the vulnerability, the real life. And if tomorrow you woke up and you had that context, but the world didn't, right? And it went back to normal, how immediately uncomfortable would you feel in the pre-pandemic world? And to me, I ask that question because it's a gauge of how many of these behaviors that we've had to develop and these skills that we've had to develop over the last 8 months have really embedded themselves. And I think there's a few really good ones that I think have taken on permanency. The ability to connect virtually, the ability to see the efficiency in a virtual first environment, the vulnerability of showing up every day with your lives in the background. And to your point, I hope that some of that stuff doesn't change.
And I would even encourage people watching right now, right? Just because I love having the experience of this.
Yeah.
And sit for a moment with that question, right? Sit for a moment. What's good about this?
What would you keep?
What would you keep? What if I told you right now you had to go back to work tomorrow? Right? It's like, I'm like, no.
You're right. Be careful what we wish for.
I don't want to drive anymore. It was such a waste of time, right? But be honest with yourself and really think about what good has come, right? Or what skill do you have now that you didn't have before? And I think that's
Yes.
a really good contemplation.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the McCarty Method. Because, you know, when I hear that, I think like, okay, there's a couple of things that Jaci does really, really well, but I also know your work is very fluid. I'm assuming you don't follow a specific formula. Tell us a little bit about your work, the way that you work with your clients, and some of the things that, you know, you've been bringing to your client relationships recently.
Well, I do many things, but what I really consider myself is a mind-body expert. So I'm passionate and fascinated by the mind-body connection. And it really goes with both of my trainings. The yoga is more of a body, although it's many things. It's breathing, it's body. And the meditation and mindfulness is more about your mind. So how the two work together or apart, right? How they can work together is really what I focus on. And how can I help and empower people to manage their mind and body instead of letting their minds and bodies take over, right? So it's bringing awareness to how we operate and how do we make shifts inside of ourselves, right? Inside, we know ourselves inside of ourselves to be able to come back to center, which is really the definition of health. Homeostasis, coming back, being in balance, right? So what I really like to do, and my McCarty method has just come from years of working mostly in mental health and addictions programs, which is where I've been working for a lot of my time, but it doesn't matter because it works for every human, right? And I have these pillars of mind, body, heart, and breath. So working on your relationship, creating a new relationship with your mind, knowing it's not such a bad neighborhood after all, it can be a better neighborhood. We're working with your body, right? Grounding into your body. And there's so much wisdom in your body. So many ways we can work with our nervous system, with our digestion, with our heart rate, right? Breath. The way we breathe, as you might have even felt this in that really short exercise we did. The way we breathe affects the way we feel, affects the way we focus, right? And then heart is all about compassion, contentment, courage, connectivity, all those kind of soft skills, which I call essential skills, right? They're human skills. We already have them. We don't have to build them. We just have to connect with them and cultivate them.
I love that.
So that's really what it's all about. And it's really about knowing your nervous system, how it operates. We're all wired the same. It's across the board, right? But yet we all react in different ways. And then knowing your mind. So then there's awareness. There's a lot of pieces to it. Yes, but those are the basics.
I love it. You know, you've got me thinking about, because I really, one of the things I wanted to get at today was just kind of unpacking this term wellness, because, you know, it means so many different things to different people. I'm curious as to, you know, because I think you've done a really good job of, you know, there's some critical components to wellness. You know, you talk about the mind, the body, the heart, and the breath. And that's not just physiological, like those parts of your being. It's also the psychology of each of those and how they're all connected. But if you were to go to the head of HR or even in organizations that have, you know, wellness as part of their organizational design, and you ask them to define wellness for their organization, I don't necessarily know if they would go to mind, body, heart, and breath.
No, they go to ergonomics. You see ergonomics a lot, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with ergonomics, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But again, you're exactly right. They're thinking of it more from a safety perspective often, right? A safety perspective. How do we keep people from falling and from, you know, getting hurt on the job? I see that a lot in HR. they're starting to add other things like nutrition, which I like seeing, breathing, I've seen, yoga, so I'm seeing it more and more, but yes, the definition, I agree, is not what I just described.
And wouldn't you argue as well that most health benefits administrators or heads of HR are almost forced to think about wellness through the lens of prevention?
Yes. Because yes, it's the bottom line kind of thing, right? It's like,
yes. Or I would say reaction, right? Where wellness can also be the other side of like, how do we care for, individuals who are struggling or who, have needs or conditions that are very particular to them. That's kind of the reactive side. And then the preventive side is, how do we prevent, right, our people from slipping into, danger or discomfort. But, when you talk about mind and body and heart and breath, there's very little that's prescriptive or preventative or reactive to that. It is about the center. It's about homeostasis, right? It's about balance. It's about creating that balance. And I maybe that is the next frontier of the way that we define wellness in the corporate environment. Would you agree?
I don't think it's going to get there right away, and it might get there through the back door. When I'm coming into a company, I probably wouldn't say, well, I'm going to be working on mind, body, heart, and breath. I probably wouldn't say that in that way. However, I would talk about, because actually it is prescriptive. We call meditation and mindfulness the antidote to stress. So it's like taking a vitamin, right? So the more you meditate on a regular basis, you're building certain parts of your brain, you're building up your immune system, you're building up other systems in your body. The more you practice gratitude, that's a heart characteristic, the more you build up a resilience to the negativity bias of the mind. So there's a lot of prescriptive stuck in there that I can focus on kind of in the back door. I remember once I was leading a meditation, and it just happened to be around Valentine's Day or something. And I decided to do kind of a kindness meditation, which in the world of meditation can be known as loving kindness, but I'll dumb it down a little bit in a corporate setting, right? So I don't want to do too woo-woo or whatever. Right. So in comes I had no idea, the head of the entire company, this huge guy, never done anything like this before. He comes in, he sits down. The feedback he gave was, I didn't really want to think about my feelings. So, it can be a little tricky, a little bit tricky when you're talking about these kind of things, but I still do it. Because I think it's important. It takes a little bit of courage to, like what you did, to throw that in there a little bit and see how it goes. Because it doesn't really matter if you're at work or at home. It's all the same. You're the same inside, no matter if you're at work or at home, right? And you're at work sometimes more than you're at home. So is
there a way that we can position wellness that appeals to, those who are looking for maybe more specific outcomes?
I think to talk about mental health is a huge way in. And we all know that anxiety and depression are huge issues. They cause people to miss work, right? Yep. And we all know that stress, chronic stress, and now we have this big word, trauma. You've probably been hearing a little bit more about trauma since
Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's you're starting to get into words that haven't really been brought into the discussion as much as maybe they should be.
Well, they're going to probably need to be now, because people, a loose definition when we're talking about trauma is kind of like the experience of near death, seeing something like that, being near something like that. And we've had a lot of that now, right? So more people than ever. I think they say 90% of people will experience a traumatic event in the United States in their lives, right? And then of those, that 90%, I think it's like 10% experience long lasting effects from it. So we don't even know how this is going to affect our nervous system come long term. It's going to depend on how we handle it in the moment.
And
so
when you argue that like we're all going to be, all of us will be post-traumatic, right? I mean, as we all kind of come out of, I mean, is this a collective traumatic experience? No?
Yes. So what that means is that you have your nervous system is dysregulated because of fearful thoughts, right? Tension and stress in your body. You're reliving something that was upsetting or caused you to be overwhelmed. So if you think about that, there's a lot of things that happen to us that still affect how we operate. And you have to really get into the physiology of it to understand it, and then to be able to regulate. We come back to this word, right? Balance, regulation. And it's not hard. It can be done through mind, body, heart, and breath. There are ways to manage our nervous systems. Very doable and very scientifically studied and recommended as well, which is great for me because there's a lot of research now. But I do think now in the corporate world, mental wellness is at the forefront. I think that's kind of understood now that we know people are suffering. They always were, but we know more now that people are more outwardly suffering and more collectively suffering.
Yep.
And always, what they say is a trauma is always an opportunity to grow and to change. So if you're able to come back to center after a trauma, you are stronger. You have more resilience. So this is another big word in the corporate world, right? We have vulnerability, we have resilience, we have courage,
authenticity,
right? And authenticity. And so I think going at it from a mental perspective, mental well-being perspective, is going to be big.
How, I think the other, interesting topic here is like, how does wellness show up in our day to day? I mean, I know that we all, are aware of the benefits of, meditation, daily physical activity, breath work. But how do we see wellness show up every day? And that could be, I've got some ideas. I mean, it could show up in your discussions and the way you communicate with others. But like, how does wellness show up for us, particularly in the corporate world? Like, how have you seen both the good and maybe the bad of that homeostasis, right? In us as leaders? How do we know, right, if we're just a little off? What are some of those indicators?
Okay, well, one of the ways that you find out if you're dysregulated is to slow down, right? To slow yourself down and to become aware. So it's self-awareness, and which to me just means turning the light on into your reality, right? Your reality. And this is where mindfulness comes into play. So mindfulness is different from meditation. Okay, mindfulness is to shine the light of awareness without judgment, just with a kind of a curiosity. It's like taking a flashlight, think of it that way, and highlighting something. So in the beginning of the class, we highlighted the sounds, we highlighted the feel of our body in the chair, right? That's your attention, your awareness. So you have to put awareness, attention inwardly to know where you are. Now, if you're not practicing that, which most people are not, they think about doing it, they read about doing it, they know it's there, they know about mindfulness, but they're not really sure how to do it. Or I think what it really is we're not ready or willing to do it because it's hard.
Right.
It's hard. It's easier to stay busy and to be
Yeah.
kind of in denial and in mindlessness, because when you shine a light on something, you have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is again, this is what we all do.
Yeah.
It's not just what people in companies do. This is what we all do. So everything starts with awareness of where you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
When I know where I am right now, I know I'm dysregulated, right? Because I feel it. There are signs in my body. My heart is racing. My breath is shallow. So there are physical symptoms of being dysregulated. I don't feel connected to my body, right? Those are some really simple ways to find out. My mind is all over the place.
Yep.
Right? I can't focus on one thing. Then there are things I can do once I know I'm dysregulated to pause and start to regulate. Okay, so then you learn the tools of how to regulate. And that's basically what I'm teaching, is how do you regulate? So you have to build up the skill of awareness, which takes slowing down and being willing. It takes intention.
Yeah.
And then you have to know how to make the shifts. So physically is a great way to know if you're dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Your palms are sweaty. You know that feeling. Or if you're more depressed, you might feel really disconnected or low energy, right? So I would say physical is probably the best indicator of being dysregulated.
Yeah, and it's true that we're not able to see these signs unless we slow down. And it's funny because I think a lot of us are afraid to slow down, because then you can't hide from what's actually happening underneath the surface, right? We call that kind of the iceberg effect, like what emotions lie beneath the water. And
yet it's the key. And yet it's the beginning of acknowledging, accepting, coming back up. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about some of the practices that you're bringing to your corporate clients. But before, you talked about mind, body, heart, and breath. And I love that breath is a component to, this homeostasis or this ability to be centered. I also know that breath work has definitely made its way it's making its way into mainstream these days. And I'm really excited about that. It's so funny. Like, I'm excited about breathing becoming a part of the discussion after all of these millennia of us not paying attention to it, right? We're finally starting to talk about breath. And I know personally, I've had a meditation practice for several years, but it hasn't been until the last year that I've started to incorporate breath work into my meditation. So I'd love for you to comment on breath work and how it's potentially showing up in your practice, and the synergistic effect between breath work and meditation.
So there's two ways to look at breath work, right? So in meditation, generally, we're using the breath as an anchor or a focus, right? Something to focus on instead of letting our mind wander all over the place. And that's kind of the practice of meditation in a nutshell, right? I focus, I wander, I come back. So we can use the breath, and it's kind of the universal anchor of presence is following your natural breath, right? Then we have what I call conscious breathing. In conscious breathing, we change the way we breathe it's prescriptive, to create a certain effect. So for instance, the breath work that we did at the beginning of class was a 4 in, 4 out breath. That's the breath of contentment. That's the breath of balance. It creates an equal inhale and exhale. And if you do it for a while, it will kind of start to regulate your nervous system. Okay. It will bring you kind of into this place. Then there are breath practices that can bring you from the down, kind of if your volume's turned way down, you feel kind of sluggish, that can bring you up towards center. And then there are the breath practices that when you're anxious, bring you down to center. Then there are the breath practices that are very focusing for your mind. So there's all different kinds of breathing. Relaxation is super important to me in what I teach. And there are certain breathing practices that babies use unknowingly to calm down, and that's belly breathing, right? So they basically, what breath work does is it affects your heart rate, affects your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, and helps you come back to center. That's really what it does. And your center, your state could be different than mine. So it's important for you to know where you are and then pick the appropriate breath practice. Because let me tell you, if you're doing breath work without a teacher, you can actually cause yourself to be, to go into even more dysregulation. And we won't get into that now, but I don't recommend, if you're really anxious, trying a breath practice that you haven't been working with a teacher.
100%. And I can vouch for that, because, you know, there's somatic breath work is making its way into mainstream, if you will. You know, you see a lot of breath work practitioners on Instagram and social media talking about somatic breath work and the value in that. And, you know, somatic breath work is more of an expression of energy, and it's oftentimes used to deal with trauma. And if you're not guided through that experience, you can dysregulate yourself even more. And so, you know, when I was brought into breathwork, I found a great breathwork practitioner. And again, I was not a believer. I mean, at first I was like, you mean to tell me, you know, I'm going to drive 45 minutes to sit with a teacher and learn how to breathe? And what I experienced in those 8 weeks is that there's so much to our breath that can be used for good. And it's also a real indicator of just where we're at. So I appreciate you adding a little bit of color to breath work and also encouraging people to learn a little bit more, because I think oftentimes, you know, we hear breath in the context of mind, body, heart. It's almost inevitable. But I think the breath piece of that might be one of the more complex, but also potentially one of the more advantageous for me.
And also one of the simplest, because wherever you are, and I just want to throw this little nugget out there, your breathing and your body, your physical body, are two anchors always to come to in the present moment, right? So when we're talking about being more aware of yourself, self-aware, when you feel your feet on the ground, put your feet on the ground, feel your butt in the chair, right? Bring your attention to your body. It slows you down. It takes you away from here, the 60 to 80,000 thoughts up here, and brings you down into here. And it's the same thing by taking a breath and taking a deep breath in and out. So I encourage everybody during your workday to breathe once an hour in a conscious way. Bring attention to your breath. That is one simple thing you can do throughout the day. And when I'm teaching people how to do this, you have to schedule it. Set it on your timer. Ding. Take a breath. You know, the old Apple Watch, we have our Breathe app. It's great. I use it. I love it. It reminds me to breathe. So your breath is there for you. Use it.
I love that. We have a question here that I think is a really good question. You know, when we talk about wellness, we think about ensuring that we're able to care for ourselves, right? That's the airplane metaphor, right?
Put
your mask on first, right?
And it's true.
How do we, you know, and the question comes in from the Zoom chat, how do we enable, you know, our team to care for themselves? You know, so that, you know, they can hold space for themselves for this type of work and for their teams. You know, how do we as leaders install, you know, wellness practices with our people?
To me, one of the definitions of being a leader, right, and being a conscious leader, is that a leader inspires that thing that's in you, in them, right? So if you embody a wellness practice and you share it, it's like giving permission for someone else. And if you know you're incorporating a wellness practice as a leader and it has affected you, people will know it. It radiates outward, right? And so there's kind of that's a kind of the simple answer to that. But I think that giving permission for people to be human, like you did in the example that you gave in the meeting, is a way to inspire people to do that. You know, hey, have the courage to start your meeting with a similar practice to what I did at the beginning of this class. Hey, everybody, before we start, we're going to put everything down. We're going to put our feet on the ground, and we're all going to take a collective deep breath in and out. We're going to take a moment to remember why we're here. Boom, start.
Yeah.
Something like that. That gives people permission to be that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think what I'm also hearing is, you know, modeling these practices yourself as well too, which is so easier said than done. Go ahead.
It is, but as a leader, you have to embody something before you can inspire someone else to do that thing. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. That's, to me, one of the definitions of being a leader, right? You're a teacher of what you have, and that inspires someone else to want to learn that thing, right? So, yeah, so I think, you know, my leaders out there, get some training in mindfulness, take up a meditation practice, you know, be the change that you want to see in other people, to quote someone really famous.
I love that. You know, it's interesting. We're already almost up against time, and I feel like there's so much more to unpack here. If people have questions or they want to reach out to you, how do people learn a little bit about the McCarty Method and how you work with your clients? And maybe speak a little bit to how do you work with your clients? Do you do one-on-one? Do you do teamwork? Is it weekly, monthly? How do you work with your folks?
All of the above. I do a little bit of everything. So I love one-on-one work, and it's all experiential. There's no slides. It's all very somatic. It's very different. The way I do teams, I do weekly. I've had at least two companies I've been working with weekly for over 5 years, where I come in and teach meditation weekly. I'm doing that via Zoom now. A little bit of everything. I also do body stuff. So I do yoga, teach yoga in companies as well. But if you want to find me, you can go to my website. That's my landing page. I also have another website, but I'm not even going to bother throwing that out. There's my email's right there. My phone number's right there. If you have questions or if you want to work, you can find me through that website. Wonderful.
I appreciate that. I'm sure some folks might reach out. Jaci, I want to thank you for joining the discussion today. I would say more than anything, I also want to thank you for just the first few moments of this. You know, I knew going in that you were going to facilitate a bit of this, but it's just, you know, the best way that we as leaders can affect and influence others is demonstrating these practices ourselves. So again, I want to appreciate, I want to thank you for stepping into the discussion and also for demonstrating some of these practices. Because it definitely allowed me a little bit of that homeostasis that I needed at the beginning of the session. So again, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having this very important conversation and for you having the courage to bring this softer stuff into the corporate conversation.
Thank you very much. So I want to note before we sign off that our November series continues. We're here every week at 3 o'clock, every Thursday at 3 o'clock. And next week, we're going to be inviting Rupert Pierce to the table. Rupert is the founder of Growing Happy. They're doing some incredible work in the nonprofit space, telling the story of their clients and how we can give back as corporate citizens. This is a part of a series here, a continuing series here that brings the most relevant leadership topics to the table, as well as the most relevant leaders to help unpack them. And we couldn't be more excited about our conversation with Rupert next Thursday, as well as continuing the dialogue on an episode by episode basis. You can find all of the information at thoughttium.com/live. And we hope that everybody has a very centered, a very balanced, and a very calm rest of the week. So long.